The most disturbing and liberating discovery that Rudolf Steiner revealed about a phenomenon that everyone experiences daily, but that remains fundamentally mysterious even after a century of neuroscientific research into brainwave patterns and sleep architecture, did not come from laboratories equipped with electroencephalographs, nor from sleep deprivation studies in monitored volunteers, but emerged from his own developed abilities of clairvoyant observation that allowed him to directly witness what happens to non-physical aspects of being human during the transition from wakefulness to sleep, and during hours of unconsciousness, when a person lies motionless, but when something is clearly still alive, differentiating a sleeping body from a corpse, even when both are equally motionless, and when a sleeping person's brain shows minimal electrical activity in deep sleep, creating the appearance that consciousness has simply temporarily turned off, waiting to reactivate upon awakening. But when Steiner observed with expanded perception, and he saw something completely different from what the materialist model suggests, discovering that during sleep there is not simply a cessation of consciousness, but there is a literal separation between components of the human constitution that normally, during wakefulness, operate completely integrated, creating illusion of indivisible unity, but which during sleep reveal their composite nature through physically separating themselves with the dense material body remaining in bed together with the envelope of vital forces which Steiner called the etheric body, responsible for keeping life processes operating and for carrying out regenerative work that takes place during sleep, whilst more subtle aspects, which are the astral body, vehicle of emotions and sensations, and the spiritual self, core of immortal individuality, literally withdraw from physical instruments, leaving for dimensions, which he described as the astral world and higher spiritual realms, where they spend hours of sleep not in a void of unconsciousness, as a person assumes when waking up without memories, but in activities that are as real and intense as anything experienced while awake, only happening in dimensions that operate according to laws completely different from the physical world, where time, space, and causality work in ways that have no correspondences in ordinary material experience, creating the impossibility of bringing clear memories back to the physical brain upon waking. Because there are no categories of brain experience that can encode what was experienced in dimensions, where perception does not depend on physical senses, nor does thought operate through neurological processes, but where consciousness works directly without the mediation of material instruments, accessing realities that are invisible to sensory perception, but that are as concrete as the physical world, having their own geographies, populations of beings that are not incarnated humans, but that are spiritual entities of various hierarchies, some serving as guides and masters for human souls, during sleep providing instructions and guidance that, although not consciously remembered upon waking, still influence the person through impressions that were recorded at deep levels of being emerging during wakefulness, as sudden intuitions or inexplicable impulses or subtle shifts in perspectives that have no apparent cause in waking life events, but are echoes of teachings received during sleep. From beings who work with humanity in aiding evolutionary development in ways that completely transcend what would be possible through conventional instruction during wakefulness, when the soul is confined to limitations of physical body and sensory perception that vastly filter what can be experienced by restricting consciousness to the narrow band of total reality that is measurable through physical instruments, leaving out immense dimensions that are accessed during sleep when the soul is free. From material constraints operating in natural ways for its spiritual essence, which only temporarily inhabits the physical body during incarnation, but which never completely loses connections with the spiritual realms from which it came before being born and to which it will return after death, which is essentially permanent sleep from which there is no awakening in the same body, but there is complete transition to purely spiritual existence until another incarnation is prepared and a new descent into the material world takes place, initiating another cycle of physical life which will be punctuated by daily sleep, functioning as a miniature rehearsal of the larger process of death and rebirth through which the soul passes on much larger scales, alternating between phases of incarnation when learning takes place through confronting resistances and limitations of matter, and phases of purely spiritual existence when integrations take place and preparations are made for next incarnations, creating a cycle that continues through multiple lives, progress idly, developing capabilities that are goals of human evolution, as Steiner understood to be not merely survival and reproduction, as in animals, but being expansion of consciousness toward capabilities that are currently latent, but that through work through many lifetimes will eventually be manifested, allowing humanity to operate consciously in multiple dimensions, simultaneously integrating spiritual wisdom with material effectiveness, in ways that currently can only be glimpsed, but that are real destinations of development when appropriate work is done across the eons. The specific process through which separation occurs during sleep is not instantaneous at the moment. A person closes their eyes, but is gradually occurring in stages that correspond to different depths of sleep, as the astral body and self progressively loosen connections with the physical and etheric body, beginning with withdrawal of sensory organs, which is why external stimuli become progressively less effective in capturing attention as the person sinks deeper into sleep until reaching the point where even loud sounds or physical touches do not penetrate consciousness, because the astral body, which is the vehicle through which sensations are experienced, has already withdrawn. Sufficiently that it is no longer in direct contact with physical sensory organs, leaving them functioning only automatically, without there being consciousness present to register impressions that are received but do not reach consciousness, because necessary intermediaries between physical stimuli and conscious experience are no longer in an appropriate position, having moved away, creating a gap that can only be crossed by very intense stimuli or by disturbances in the etheric body, which still maintains some contact with the astral body, even when separation has progressed considerably, allowing certain types of events, such as sensations of falling or suffocation, to still reach consciousness, pulling soul partially back towards the body, creating those disturbing moments where the person almost wakes up, but not completely remaining in a liminal state between sleep and wakefulness, which is the territory of dreams, where the soul is partially reconnected with the body sufficiently so that impressions can be registered in physical memory but not completely reintegrated, creating hybrid experiences that mix elements of distorted sensory perceptions with contents coming from spiritual dimensions that the soul was visiting, resulting in bizarre narratives that characterize dreams where ordinary logic does not apply and where physical impossibilities happen naturally because they are reflecting realities of dimensions where laws are different, not being bound by constraints of matter that govern the physical world, but operating according to principles of spiritual affinities and symbolic meanings that connect events not through mechanical causality, but through resonances of qualities, creating associations that appear random when analyzed from the perspective of material logic, but that make perfect sense when understood as a language of spiritual dimensions that communicate through symbols and metaphors rather than through literal descriptions, requiring interpretation that goes beyond taking dream contents at face value to recognize deeper meanings that are being communicated through images that are bridges between dimensions, translating spiritual experiences into forms that can be partially retained in brain memory, even when translation is necessarily distorted, because there are no direct equivalences between modes of experience in different dimensions, creating a situation where dreams are only fragmented and highly edited, glimpses of much vaster experiences that occur during complete sleep, but that are inaccessible to ordinary memory, leaving the person with the impression that they slept without dreaming, when in fact, remembered dreams are only a small fraction of nocturnal activities, being moments where the soul is sufficiently close to body that impressions could be transferred to the brain, which then processes them according to its own limitations and categories, creating narratives that are compromises between spiritual realities that have been experienced and brain representation capabilities that are limited to working with images and concepts derived from ordinary sensory experience, not having adequate vocabulary to directly express what was experienced in dimensions that completely transcend categories of physical perception, resulting in distortions that are inevitable, but that still preserve fragments of truths that can be recovered through careful interpretation. Recognizing the symbolic nature of dream language that does not should be taken literally, but should be read as poetry where meanings are layered, requiring sensitivity to nuances and arrangements. Action of going beyond surfaces to depths where real messages reside, waiting to be discovered by those who have the patience and intuition to work with symbols, recognizing that they are portals to dimensions that cannot be accessed directly through ordinary perception, but which can be touched indirectly through languages that operate on multiple levels, simultaneously allowing truths that transcend literal expression to be communicated to those who have developed abilities to read between them. Lines recognizing that what is said directly is only surface, and that real meanings are hidden in depths requiring work of interpretation, which is art as much as science, requiring not only technical knowledge of symbols, but also developed sensitivity that comes through practicing attention to subtle dimensions of experience, cultivating abilities to perceive that which is not obvious but which is still present, waiting to be noticed by those who look with eyes that see beyond appearances too, essences that are invisible but real. The multiple purposes that sleep serves as understood by Steiner go far beyond simply allowing the body to rest, including the first and most fundamental renewal of life forces, not through purely biological processes, but through reconnection with spiritual sources of vitality that are not available in the material world, but are accessed when the soul temporarily returns to dimensions from which it originally came, bringing back energies that are then transferred to the etheric body, which distributes them to the physical body, allowing life processes to continue during the next waking period until resources are once again depleted, requiring another cycle of sleep for renewal, creating absolute dependence on regular reconnections with spiritual sources, without which physical life could not be sustained, demonstrating that materialism is fundamentally wrong in assuming that life is generated only by physical processes, when in fact, life flows from spiritual sources to material manifestations through mediations that include sleep as the essential channel through which spiritual energies are brought into the physical world, sustaining not only survival but vitality that allows for optimal functioning rather than mere minimal existence, revealing that quality of life profoundly depends on quality of sleep, not only in terms of duration, but in terms of how effectively the soul can do work of renewal during nighttime hours, which, when disturbed by stresses or substances or irregular patterns, impede natural processes, resulting in sleep, which, although long in hours, does not bring true restoration because the soul was unable to access necessary sources due to conditions that blocked healthy separation, or that created turbulence in subtle dimensions, preventing regenerative works that should take place, but were obstructed, leaving the person waking up tired even after 8 hours in bed, demonstrating that quantity is not enough if quality is compromised, revealing the importance of creating appropriate conditions for healthy sleep, not only through physical hygiene, but through spiritual preparation that includes calming emotions and thoughts before bed through practices such as quiet review of the day or brief meditation or readings that elevate consciousness by creating internal states that facilitate harmonious separation, instead of creating resistances that prevent the soul from leaving the body, completely resulting in superficial sleep, where the person remains partially trapped in the body, unable to reach depths necessary for complete renewal, remaining in liminal states that are neither full wakefulness nor true sleep, but are uncomfortable hybrids that do not serve the purposes of any phase-leaving person, exhausted on both sides, unable to rest adequately, nor able to do spiritual work that requires complete separation, demonstrating that healthy sleep is not just a matter of lying down and closing eyes, but requires conscious preparation and appropriate conditions, both external and internal, allowing natural processes to happen unhindered, revealing that spiritual development is not separated from practical aspects of life such as sleep, but profoundly affects everything, including the ability to rest adequately, which, when compromised, undermines health on all levels by creating vicious cycles where poor sleep quality leads to increased stress during wakefulness, which then disrupts subsequent sleep, establishing a degenerative pattern that can continue for years, resulting in chronic exhaustion and eventual collapse that has roots not only in physical factors, but in the inability of the soul to do necessary regenerative work during sleep due to conditions that were created through life choices that did not respect spiritual needs, stating that integral health requires attention to all dimensions of the human being and cannot be achieved by focusing only on physical aspects, ignoring spiritual dimensions that, although invisible, are fundamental to total well-being, demonstrating that while you sleep, your soul remains awake, doing work that is essential for life, not wasting time, but being an active phase of existence that contributes unique elements to the totality of human development that requires regular alternation between wakefulness and sleep, both phases being necessary for a complete life that honors all dimensions of human nature, recognizing that sleep is a portal to spiritual dimensions, that they are as real as the material world, and in fact more fundamental, because they are sources from which life flows, sustaining physical existence through influxes that occur during sleep, when the soul reconnects with origins, bringing back what is necessary to continue the journey through the material world that would be impossible to navigate without these regular returns to spiritual realms, demonstrating fundamental interdependence between dimensions that are not separate, but are complementary aspects of total reality, including both, and healthy human life operates in both, alternating through a daily rhythm that is a natural law established not arbitrarily, but according to deep needs of human constitution, which requires participation in multiple dimensions for complete development, revealing that while you sleep, your soul remains awake, living fully in spiritual dimensions, doing work that sustains life on all levels, demonstrating that sleep is not emptiness, but is a plenitude of activities that, although not remembered, are crucial for well-being and continuous development that happens through alternating between phases that together create totality of human experience, encompassing both material and spiritual aspects, all being necessary for integral life that recognizes and honors both dimensions. not only living on the surface of waking, but also valuing depths that are accessed during sleep through which soul maintains living connections with spiritual sources that sustain existence, revealing that while you sleep, your soul remains awake, actively operating in service of life that never stops, but only changes dimensions. A soul alternates between being connected with body and being free, operating in ways that together create a wealth of human experience that is much vaster than appears, when only waking is considered without recognizing importance of sleep, which is an essential component of integral human existence, demonstrating that while you sleep, your soul remains awake, doing work that is as important as waking activities, contributing to the totality of life, which, when lived consciously recognizing both phases, reveals itself to be a journey through multiple dimensions, all of which are necessary for complete development, which is the destiny and possibility of every human being. When proper work is done to honor all dimensions of existence by living in ways that support both waking and sleeping, allowing both to contribute to development, which is the fundamental purpose of human life, transcending material goals to include spiritual evolution, which happens through working in multiple dimensions, revealing that while you sleep, your soul remains awake, actively participating in processes that serve not only individual well-being, but development of humanity as a totality. Demonstrating that sleep has both personal and collective dimensions, both being important, revealing that each sleeping person is participating in greater work that takes place in spiritual dimensions, serving purposes that transcend individual life, connecting with evolutionary processes that benefit totality, demonstrating that while you sleep, your soul remains awake, operating in the service of developments that go beyond personal interests, including collective good, revealing that sleep is a portal to dimensions where essential work takes place, serving evolution, which is the shared destiny of humanity, progressing through the efforts of many, each contributing through their own developments, that when they are genuine benefit not only the individual, but the totality, demonstrating that while you sleep, your soul remains awake, doing work that sustains life on all levels, and that serves greater purposes, revealing that sleep deserves to be honored as a sacred phase of existence that contributes essential elements to the totality of human life, that is much richer than appears on the surface when only wakefulness is considered, without recognizing depths that are accessed during sleep, through which the soul maintains living connections with spiritual dimensions that are sources of vitality, guidance and meaning, sustaining not just survival, but flourishing of potentials that can only be realized when both dimensions of existence are recognized and honored by living consciously in both worlds, revealing that while you sleep, your soul remains awake, living fully in dimensions that are as real as the material world and in fact more fundamental, because they are sources from which life flows, demonstrating that complete understanding of human existence requires recognizing sleep not as an interruption, but as an essential phase that has its own value contributing to the totality of life, that when lived consciously, honoring both phases, reveals itself to be a journey through multiple dimensions, all of which are necessary for the integral development that is objective and possibility when appropriate work is done to live in ways that support both wakefulness and sleep, allowing both to contribute to development, which is a fundamental purpose, revealing that while you sleep, your soul remains awake doing essential work for life that never stops, but only changes dimensions, as the soul alternates between being connected with the body during wakefulness and being free during sleep, operating in ways that together create totality of human experience, demonstrating that life is much more vast than appears on the surface, including spiritual dimensions that are visited every night, revealing that while you sleep, your soul remains awake. EF only during wakefulness and completely unconscious during sleep, creating fragmentation that characterizes ordinary existence but is not necessary, and is the result of incomplete development that can be overcome through systematic work to expand consciousness beyond the limitations of the waking state, developing the capacity to remain aware even when the physical body is asleep and when the brain is not operating in normal modes that support ordinary conscious thought, requiring the development of forms of awareness that do not depend on physical instruments, but that operate directly in spiritual dimensions, allowing the soul to consciously observe and participate in nocturnal activities, rather than merely passing through them in a state of semi-consciousness, which is a normal condition but not a necessary condition, and can be transformed through practices that Steiner outlined, including concentration exercises that strengthen the ability to maintain voluntary focus of attention, which is a muscle that can be developed through regular training, to the point where it can be maintained even during the transition to sleep, rather than automatically dissolving as the body relaxes, and ordinary consciousness fades, being replaced by states that are normally unconscious, but which through appropriate development can become conscious, allowing the person to observe the entire process of fall asleep, seeing how the astral body and self progressively detach from the physical. And etheric body, directly experiencing sensations that accompany separation that are normally lost in unconsciousness, but which, when observed consciously, are revealed to have characteristic qualities that include sensation of expansion, as consciousness is no longer confined to the limits of physical body, but spreads beyond, creating experience of being much greater than bodily form. Sensation of lightness, as weight of matter is left behind, and soul floats free, no longer being pulled by gravity, which affects only physical body, having no power over astral body that operates according to different laws, and eventually sensation of movement as soul begins to travel through spiritual dimensions, visiting regions that have their own characteristics that can be observed and remembered when appropriate capacity has been developed through years of patient practice that gradually expands boundaries of awareness beyond limitations of ordinary cerebral consciousness, allowing one to operate in multiple dimensions, simultaneously maintaining continuity of experience through all phases of existence, instead of living only fragments, alternating between being conscious during wakefulness and completely lost during sleep, creating gaps that make life appear to be a disconnected series of episodes rather than being coherent. Continuity, what it really is, when seen from an expanded perspective that recognizes sleep not as an interruption, but as a continuation of life in different dimensions, revealing that spiritual development is not just a matter of having occasional special experiences, but is a fundamental transformation of how consciousness operates, expanding capabilities beyond limitations that appear to be absolute, but which in fact are just conditions of current development that can be transcended through appropriate work, demonstrating that human potentials are much greater than materialist culture recognizes, including the possibility of operating consciously in multiple dimensions simultaneously, which is the objective of spiritual development, as Steiner understood not being escape from the material world, but being integration of material and spiritual capabilities in full functioning that uses all dimensions of human nature instead of operating with just a fraction of potentials, leaving vast latent capabilities because they were not developed through practices that are necessary to manifest them, transforming them from mere theoretical possibilities into real abilities that transform the experience of living, making it much richer and more meaningful when all dimensions are accessed consciously instead of living only on the surface while awake, ignoring depths that are visited during sleep but that remain unconscious. For the majority of people who have never developed the ability to maintain awareness through transitions between states, creating the false impression that sleep is empty, when in fact it is fullness that is simply veiled by limitations of ordinary consciousness that can be transcended, revealing the vastness of experience that is happening every night, waiting to be discovered by those who do the necessary work of developing appropriate capacities through practices that expand boundaries of consciousness, allowing dimensions that were previously inaccessible to become progressively available for conscious exploration, transforming sleep from incomprehensible mystery into known territory that can be navigated with the same familiarity that the physical world is navigated during wakefulness, demonstrating that division between wakefulness and sleep is not absolute, but is only a function of current development that can be overcome through appropriate efforts, revealing that while you sleep, your soul remains awake, and that through appropriate development, you can also remain consciously awake instead of losing consciousness during transition, creating continuity that transforms experience of existence, revealing riches that were always present but that were inaccessible due to limitations that seem to be absolute, but that are only temporary conditions of development that can be transcended through patient work that expands consciousness beyond boundaries that seem fixed, but which are in fact permeable, allowing consciousness to flow through all dimensions of reality instead of being confined to just the physical dimension, which is merely one among many that constitute the totality of human existence, revealing that life is much vaster than appearances suggest, including spiritual dimensions, which are as real as the material world, being in fact more fundamental, because they are sources from which physical manifestations emerge, demonstrating that complete understanding of reality requires recognizing multiple dimensions, all being necessary for the total picture, which includes both visible and invisible aspects, both being real and important, contributing to the totality of existence, which, when it is lived, consciously recognizing all dimensions proves to be much richer and more meaningful than when only the surface is known without awareness of depths that are accessed during sleep, through which the soul maintains living connections with spiritual dimensions by visiting them regularly every night, even when there is no conscious memory of these visits upon awakening, because necessary capacities to retain memories of spiritual experiences have not yet been developed, but can be cultivated through appropriate practices. allowing that eventually the person can clearly remember nighttime journeys, bringing back to wakefulness knowledge and insights that were obtained in spiritual dimensions during sleep, enriching awakening life, with wisdom that transcends what can be learned only through physical experiences, demonstrating that integral development requires working in multiple dimensions, all contributing unique elements to the totality of wisdom that is the result of navigating both the material and spiritual worlds, learning lessons that each offers integrating into a unified understanding that transcends limitations of partial perspectives that see only isolated aspects without recognizing how they connect in the bigger picture, revealing that while you sleep, your soul continues to act ordained doing essential work, and that through development you can progressively participate consciously in these works rather than passing through them in unconsciousness, expanding capabilities beyond current limitations toward potentials that are legitimate destinations of human evolution when appropriate work is done, demonstrating that sleep need not remain mystery but can become known territory through development of capabilities that allow conscious exploration of dimensions that are visited nightly, revealing riches that transform understanding of what it means to be human, expanding far beyond materialistic definitions that limit person to only physical aspects, ignoring spiritual. Dimensions that are fundamental to the totality of human nature that, when recognized and developed properly, reveals potentials that vastly exceed what contemporary culture assumes to be possible, demonstrating that limitations that appear to be absolute are only conditions of current development that can be transcended through dedicated work that expands consciousness, allowing a person to operate in multiple dimensions, simultaneously living fully in both the material and spiritual worlds, integrating experiences of both dimensions into wisdom that is the fruit of integral development that honors all dimensions of human nature, revealing that while you sleep, your soul remains awake, and that this truth does not need to remain only theoretical knowledge, but can become lived experience through development that allows conscious participation in nocturnal work that the soul performs in spiritual dimensions, transforming sleep from a period of unconsciousness into an active phase of existence that contributes consciously to total development, demonstrating that human life, when lived in the fullness of potentials, operates continuously in multiple dimensions without gaps of unconsciousness, but with awareness flowing through all phases and states, maintaining continuity that reveals the totality of human experience, encompassing much more than just waking hours, including spiritual dimensions that are accessed during sleep, and that, when they are consciously known, they enrich life immensely by providing perspectives and resources that are not available only through physical experiences, demonstrating that spiritual development is not an optional luxury, but is the realization of potentials that are an essential part of human nature, waiting to be manifested through appropriate work that each person can do when they have the necessary sincerity and dedication, revealing that while you sleep, your soul remains awake, doing work that sustains life, and that through development, you can progressively participate consciously, transforming sleep of mystery into known territory that can be navigated with awareness, expanding boundaries of human experience beyond limitations that seem fixed, but are only temporary conditions that can be transcended, revealing vastness of reality that includes spiritual dimensions visited during sleep, demonstrating that while you sleep, your soul remains awake, living fully in dimensions that are as real as the material world, and that through appropriate development, you can also live consciously in these dimensions, maintaining continuity of awareness through all phases of existence, revealing totality of human life that is much richer than appears on the surface when only waking is known, without recognizing depths accessed during sleep, through which soul maintains living connections with spiritual sources that sustain existence, demonstrating that while you sleep, your soul remains awake,